Good afternoon. My name is David Rayla. I'm the hearing officer for San Francisco Public Works. Cerise Waders is the clerk of this hearing. This hearing is being recorded and a sign-in sheet is on the table on the side of the room. Please be sure to sign in for our records and so that if necessary, we can contact you in the future regarding the item that you're here for. This public hearing is being held to consider one item, which is split into really four locations. Order number 200996 to consider the removal of 39 street trees, ficus, with replacement, unless otherwise noted. Adjacent to the location listed below, and I'm gonna go through this fairly quick, just to make sure that there's no misunderstandings. So as I mentioned earlier, the following location on Otavia Street is 508 Otavia for 6 ficus, 534 Otavia, 2 ficus. Between 550 and 560 Otavia for 5 ficus trees, 600 Otavia for 3, 630 for 1, 636 for 1, 666, now I'm regretting this, for 2 ficus, 601 for 2 ficus, 523 for 1 ficus, 515, 1 ficus, 501 for 1 poplar tree. Then on Hayes Street, we got close to 412 Hayes for 3 ficus, not replantable because of bus zone. 430 Hayes for 1 ficus, 520 for 3 ficus, 568 for 1 ficus. Then on Grove Street, I have 499 Grove for 2 ficus, 501 Grove for 1 ficus, 530 Grove for 1 ficus. Finally, on Ivy Street, I have 380 Ivy for 1 ficus and 426 Ivy for 1 ficus. And I hope I'm saying this right, Ivy or Ivy? Ivy, right? Yeah, like the plant, right? Okay, great. All right, so my job as the hearing officer is to gather the facts for the hearing items, listen to your testimonies, and help our Director of Public Works make determinations. I will be not making any decisions today. Instead, I will forward the findings from this hearing and make my recommendation to the Director. The directors will make the final determinations. When the director determinations are made, the department will notify you of them. Therefore, if you want to be notified, please make sure to sign in. The hearing will proceed as follows. I will ask Public Works Bureau of Urban Forestry to speak first and describe how the item arrived at today's hearing. My understanding is going to be the format of a presentation for about 30 minutes. Afterwards, I will take public comments, including those that submitted written comments to the department. Then I will allow the protesters to speak and answer any of the comments. And then lastly, any agency, including Public Works, may speak again. So each speaker will have up to, about 3 minutes. Minutes to speak. The clerk will monitor the time for all speakers. When you hear the first bell, it will mean that the speaker has 30 seconds left to speak. A louder second bell will signal that the time is up. Comments and questions should be addressed to me only, and not the department or the protester. If you cannot finish your comment within the allotted time, you can submit written testimony to me by the end of this hearing or by email to the department. If I feel that a question is warranted, I will ask that question. After all comments are completed, I will close the item. We will now begin the hearing. May I have Public Works Bureau of Urban Forestry make his presentation, please.
Good evening, Chris Buck with San Francisco Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry. I'm going to try to thread the needle tonight, both trying to be as thorough as possible, but also respectful of everyone's time so that folks here can provide their testimony. Out of show of hands, how many, out of curiosity, attended one of the 2 walkthroughs that we did together? So a good amount, but not everyone. And so because of that, we want to begin the presentation with a little background and sort of who, what, when, why, and how Again, Public Works strategic plan is to ensure safe, clean, and green infrastructure and public rights of way. And Proposition E a couple of years ago passed, which is now being implemented, and we refer to it as Street Tree SF. We're now systematically going across the city and pruning and maintaining trees on a grid or key map basis. And it's during this work that brought us to Key Map 25, which sits really in sort of the heart of Hayes Valley. During this work, we typically evaluate the trees several months in advance of doing actual tree maintenance, pruning, or removal. In this particular case, we came across a lot of ficus trees that we found to be in very poor structural condition, and we reached out to the community to talk about our findings. Generally speaking, we've had a lot of challenges with ficus trees over the last several years. It was once a popular street tree. Everyone looks at it and says, oh, it's so green and so healthy looking. The initial issues were actually related to sidewalk damage caused by tree roots years ago. So by the mid-1990s, San Francisco started slowing and even stopping the planting of ficus trees because of our concerns about damage to the sidewalk. But there was also, in the last number of years, an increasing amount of large stem failures, which presents public safety concerns, either because of blocked roads, property damage, or injuries. In November 2014, the Director of Public Works created Order Number 183151, which is referred to as the tree removal criteria for ficus trees. We've always prided ourselves in having a pretty high set of standards when it comes to allowing trees for removal at Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry. But in acknowledgement of the structural issues we were facing, the director, after a number of years of letting us sort of try our hand at managing these trees, said, you know, we're risking too much regarding public safety. So what this order does is it actually acknowledges the benefits and value of ficus trees. They have a really large broadleaf evergreen canopy that intercepts a lot of stormwater. It's really an amazing tree. Visitors from the East Coast, when they see ficus, they say, wow, you know, it's winter and you have so many bright green trees. The order also outlines in detail the structural defects that are leading to the large stem failures. And the primary issue is codominant stems or codominant leaders with narrow angles of attachment with or without included bark. We have more information about this on our website. And we physically have this evening on the table to the left copies of the director's order that goes into the details. I just want to show some sort of universal photos of ficus trees and how they fail structurally. So again, a codominant leader are stems of competing sizes. And with different species, some species can handle that and don't have a lot of failures. Ficus have proven that they fail quite often. Anecdotally, when we go out and respond to storm emergency responses, if we have 20 trees down or parts of trees down, over the winter we might have 15 out of 20 of those trees be ficus trees. And you can see how they split. What's happening with these codominant leaders or competing stems is they're both growing laterally. And that obviously doesn't allow the bark to have space to grow. So it's a natural place within the structure where they'll literally split apart. So there's been a lot of media coverage. Most folks here have been aware of that. There was a Hayes Valley meeting a few months ago. And then again, recently at 364 Hayes, another ficus went down, so closer to home. But it's just something we've been seeing across the city. On Oak and Fell, we've seen a number of ficus failures. And one thing to note, we're going to be looking at a lot of photos today with really narrow sidewalks and just showing how wide a ficus tree actually can get. This is at Joe DiMaggio Playground in North Beach. From this side, the tree looks fine, but I'm just showing the horizontal spread of the species. This is the back side of the same tree. It split apart, and the remaining sections were unsafe, and it had to be removed. It's interesting to note that all of the ficus trees along Joe DiMaggio Playground on that street have been removed since this time. And this is what it looks like. There's actually no decay. So Sometimes there is decay present, but in most cases, this has nothing to do with decay present in the stems. They're literally splitting apart even with sound wood. So backing up again, we reached out to the community to explain our findings that we identified 39 street trees, mostly ficus, in the immediate area for removal. Our staff attended a Hayes Valley Neighborhood Association meeting and were in touch with them via email. And we decided jointly that we should do at least a couple of walks with the community to look at the trees specifically. And we heard loud and clear throughout that process. The community clearly values these trees a great deal. We expected that, which is why we reached out to Hayes Valley in advance. But we were asked repeatedly to return to see if any trees could be phased or pruned in a more aggressive fashion. So what follows is a review of 28 trees still proposed for removal out of the 39. And then what follows after that is a review of the 11 trees that we're now proposing to be retained, but with an experimental or aggressive pruning approach. And we would, at a minimum, we would retain them until the next inspection or maintenance cycle, which would be 3 years from now. So diving in, this is the order that's been posted on the 39 street trees. We also have up front to my left a copy of the 11 sites where we're now proposing to retain the trees and prune them. So jumping right in, 508 Octavia, tree number 3, is a tree that we still propose for removal. It has a lot of codominant stems with included bark. And the challenge with this particular tree is that a large amount of its canopy is directly over the roadway. We require 14 feet of clearance directly over the roadway, not just for people moving into the neighborhood or delivery trucks, but also if there's ever a water line or unexpected, unplanned maintenance in the roadway, traffic will get routed towards the curb. This happens every day across the city. And we will be at a loss with what to do. So even though it's evolved this way, we can't allow that to be the case. We've had a lot of ficus fail because trucks catch them and actually exacerbate the large stem failure. So this is the third tree in from Hayes. Tree number 5 on the same block, so the 5th tree from Hayes is 508 Octavia. This tree also has very poor structure, several codominant leaders with very narrow, acute angles of attachment. Views of both the front and the back. And we'll see how much time I have to get through these all, but I do want to show that these are just a portion of the photos that we took of each individual tree. Again, tree number 6 on the same block, a lot of codominant leaders, narrow angles of attachment, and just a number of, if a tree has 1 or 2 secondary smaller branches with attachments like that, we'd be more inclined to maintain it and prune it. But when they're just so abundant, it's really a management challenge. Also, when we evaluate trees, generally speaking, we don't have any preset numbers in mind. We have to just evaluate the trees one by one and see what we have to work with. So we knew there were probably going to be some issues here. We didn't know exactly what and how many. On this next block of Octavia on the east side from Ivy to Grove, we have 4 of the 7 trees that we still wish to propose for removal, but retaining 3 on this block. The first tree is in front of 534 Octavia. You'll see this on the next image. 2, really the main stems are just pinched between these former branches. This is a really bad angle of attachment. And then on the front, the reverse side, additional very poor structure, definitely prone to fail without a doubt. Tree number 2 at 534 Octavia, also proposed for removal. Many codominant leaders. Obviously, a lot of pedestrians, motorists present at all times. 2 codominant stems with a very narrow, acute angle of attachment. This one has a crack. A little curious. I haven't seen that typically in ficus, mid-stem like that. But again, you can see where they join is very problematic. And secondary structure of the same tree. Moving on to 555 to 560 Octavia on the same block. Tree number 1 is proposed for removal. Many codominant stems with included bark. Now, it's important to note that is there a way to prune trees in a manner that would prevent this from happening in the first place? And the answer is yes. So for sure, both the city and property owners have missed that boat over the years. Some might even say negligent. But we really, as an industry, didn't emphasize structural pruning until really the last 20 to 30 years. The other thing is that some of these issues even started back when the trees were in the nursery. So nurseries where you buy trees want the tree to look full. So what they used to do is nip the top a stem, and that would produce a lot of lateral growth. And a property owner would say, that tree looks really full and healthy, I want to plant that. But the top of the tree wasn't pruned structurally so that you create one single stem again. So a lot of even on the walk, someone pointed out, wow, all these trees at like 8 feet seem to have, they all start one trunk dividing into all these other stems. You know, what's the cause of that? And I realized, like, oh yeah, this is talked about all the time. Now, nurseries don't typically do that. If they do, then we don't do business there. Now, when a tree is planted, we plant and plan to maintain that tree from both before it's purchased, when it's purchased, and then early structural pruning visits to make sure we're not, I just heard the phrase, growing more problems in the future. We can actually, with hand pruners, a really simple, inexpensive pruning cut can fix these problems in the future. So this is something we know now and something we have responded to. But these are the conditions, again, that we're looking at in Hayes Valley. Tree number 3 has similar codominant stems. This one also has a lean over the road. So again, looking at could we retain this tree if we pruned it aggressively, it would still have too many issues to make that a sustainable option. Also codominant leader right in the main stem. Here's another view of the same tree. I believe there's a few more trees on that block. Most likely we'll get back to those. On the 600 block of Octavia, there's tree 1, 2, and 3. Tree 1 is on the far right, tree 3 is on the far left. We propose retaining tree number 3 on the far left and pruning it aggressively to reduce the likelihood of failure. Tree number 1 is very poor structure, and you can see that in this image. The 2 main stems have a very acute angle of attachment with this vertical seam between them. And on the back side, you can see more of the same codominant stems that are really squeezed in between each other. This tree has a natural lean out towards the corner of the intersection. And again, more of the same codominant stems with very deep bark inclusions. Tree number 2, we're also proposing for removal, codominant stems with included bark. This one has a strong lean towards the roadway. So again, there's no easy way to mitigate the pruning of this tree to leave something behind that would be pleasing to the eye. Many codominant leaders with included bark. And I was joking during the walk. I mean, it's a serious matter, but I sometimes joke that some of these kind of even compete with medical encyclopedias that show like the worst diseases possible that make you cringe. And some of these trees do make us cringe when we look at them. It's almost like, could you create trees with any more poor structure? Sometimes it's hard to believe. So this tree in front of 630 Octavia, again, a number of very weak attachments throughout. .666 Octavia, there's 2 trees at this location. Both trees are proposed for removal due to poor structure. This one's had a large trunk failure, and there's 4 stems above it which are prone to fail. Someone planted a ficus, didn't get the memo that we don't prune ficus anymore. Obviously, in our replanting plan, we would need to post that for removal, but we would certainly want to swap that out with a more appropriate species. We are in the process of also engaging the community, specifically Hayes Valley Neighborhood Association, in a discussion about replacement species. This is the last tree on the block of Octavia, multiple codominant stems with included bark. And this tree also has old topping cuts higher up in the canopy, and this shows you what happens when you make topping cuts to trees. It creates a kind of haphazard resprouting of different branches, which are prone to fail. So we're now across the street to the west side of 601 Octavia. We issued a fine to this property owner about 10 years ago for excessively pruning these 3 trees. The tree on the far right since died. So these trees are in very poor condition. The main stems have codominant leaders with included bark, but also the secondary branching, because it was topped, have a lot of secondary branches which are now prone to fail. Tree number 2 at the same address, or tree site number 3 overall, similar situation, very poor structure, codominant stems and included bark. And this is actually what happens when you top a tree and then neglect it and you don't thin out the resulting growth. It's a real challenge. Oddly enough, this looks like it would be ideal for nesting, but when we're out there, we didn't really notice a lot of or any nesting out there. Ficus are kind of known for having a pretty low habitat potential. So I just wanted to note that as well. Some ficus trees have caused a lot of damage. We're really looking at just the structure of the trees. On Hayes Street, that's often more of an issue. So there are trees that we're retaining. They're smaller, of course, but these 4 trees on the west side of Octavia, they're relatively small. This is a low risk of failure. By keeping these trees, we do literally kick the can, but we also hear from the public, like, we don't want to remove all the trees on Octavia. They're certainly smaller, so they pose a less public safety concern. Moving on to the next block, 515 and 523 Octavia. Both of these trees are under the high voltage and low voltage lines, and they've been pruned aggressively by PG&E a number of times to keep them out of the high voltage lines. They're in very poor condition. They have codominant stems. Again, one of those medical examples of just really terrible structure. And I remember when we started the walk together, the first walk, we started with 1 tree and someone said, well, certainly they're not all going to look this bad. And I kind of had to bite my tongue and say, well, let's wait and see. But there's some really bad structure out here. Again, codominant leaders with included bark. So the one non-ficus, there used to be another poplar out here at 501 Octavia, but this poplar tree, while green and appearing healthy, has a really large cavity of decay in the base of the trunk. Poplar is a genus that doesn't compartmentalize decay well, it doesn't resist decay well. We've known about the decay present. A number of years ago, we repaired sidewalk, or we had the property owner repair the sidewalk, and removal was either denied or not pursued, but we've been keeping an eye on that decay level. But as I zoom in here, you have to really look in deep here because the opening is pretty small. But the more you really probe and look into this, the more you see that the decay really extends very deep into this base of the tree's trunk. The decay present is on the left side of this image, and if you can look at this, there typically is root flare at the base of a tree's trunk. So narrow the top, comes down, and there should be sort of this root flare, and there is some on the right and in the foreground. There's absolutely no root flare on the left side, and that's also where the decay is present. The other problem is we've also done, or the property owner has done, sidewalk repair on the opposite side of that decay. The tree, managing a Lombardy poplar in a sidewalk setting is pretty challenging. It's a rare tree to have in the sidewalk. They're very fast growing, but also short-lived because they tend to have a lot of large stem failures. So the tree has been topped repeatedly. But at this point, it's primarily the amount of decay present in the base of that trunk that really concerns us. And so that's why we initiated the removal of 501 Octavia. Moving on to Hayes, this is a much shorter, squatter tree, but we have, sometimes I refer to it as a Shakespearean, like, fatal flaw. This one has a fatal flaw right in the center of the trunk, an old injury, but this is an old injury with a lot of decay present. So this makes the stem on the right very prone to failing because it doesn't have a sound wood connecting them. And again, even if it did, as I pointed out, we have serious concerns about that. So this one has a flaw that we just can't look past, even though the height of the tree is relatively small, considering the overall size of the trunk. This is the reverse side of the same structure, very poor structure, again, with a large cavity of decay on the front side. Moving on to the 500 block of Hayes. On this block, there's a number of other species. There's a red ironbark eucalyptus in the foreground. There's silk oaks, and there's even a Brazilian pepper. And then there's these 3 trees that are sort of intermixed among them. So these we propose to remove, again, because of their poor structure. And the reason why I included that photo from Joe DiMaggio Playground is I wanted to counter that with what we're actually doing here on Hayes, which is, again, we're having the ficus sort of thread this vertical needle. Across the street, they look fine. But when you look up, this is literally what we have. The public sometimes refer to it as half a tree. Again, we're not opposed to that if the tree has good structure. We're happy to keep maintaining that. But in this case, these 3 trees have very poor structure, and Hayes Street obviously is even busier than Octavia. This is ficus number 1 of the 3 ficus. And it's hard to see, but there's a lot of codominant stems with deep bark inclusions throughout the canopy. Tree number 2, same situation, really large tree with codominant stems, bark inclusions, some previous failures. Another close-up of the structure of ficus number 2. This is a side view. What I'm trying to emphasize here is the image on the right. It's amazing this stem is still connected. You know, there's very little connective tissue that's holding this large stem in place. And tree number 3 is this tree that's very narrow, but also very close to the street light, and also has a very significant structural defect right there, crack and decay present. Last tree on Hayes Street is 568 Hayes. The challenge with this tree, again, is poor structure. It's also 9 feet from the streetlight. If we were to do our aggressive or experimental pruning of this tree, it would literally engulf the streetlight. So I wanted to show just how entwined with the streetlight the ficus already is. The other issue is it does, on the back side, the sidewalk side, it does have codominant stems with narrow angles of attachment. It also has strike marks from trucks. And so what we're concerned about is a repeat of what happened at 364 Hayes, where a truck makes contact and it really hastens the splitting apart of the tree. If the street light wasn't there, it could be a debate, but between the strike marks, the contact from the trucks and the street light, we also are proposing removal of this tree as well. This is the street light in question. Moving on to the side streets at 499 Grove Street. These 2 trees are proposed for removal. They're also underneath high voltage lines. They also were pruned very heavily by PG&E when this pole was maintained. The tree on the right, there's very little canopy remaining of it, and what remains is structurally unsound. There's an old topping cut on the upper right. You can see these stems have sprouted back, but they're prone to failure. Here's the main structure of the tree. Tree number 2, as you can see, looks a little ghastly. It's been heavily pruned. It's in low voltage wires and high voltage wires. It also has very poor structure, and again, not enough of the tree remains that's structurally sound to make heading it back in an aggressive manner really a sustainable option. 501 Grove is where we started our walk. On the 2 walks that we took, had a very poor structure for such a small tree. Again, both sides, multiple codominant stems that that have strong potential for failure. This one does have sidewalk damage. And regarding replacement trees, we heard clearly from the community we have a number of missing trees, or empty tree basins as we call them. We're aware of most of them. One of the things we're engaging with the community on is seeing that these get planted. So we've been pursuing that with both Hayes Valley Neighborhood Association, the community, and also Friends of the Urban Forest, with the goal being that we plant approximately 40 of the empty basins that are nearby in June. So we did hear that feedback, and we agree that it's something that would begin to build trust, because that was a big word we kept hearing, understandably, from the public when we met, which is, if you're removing trees, what if you don't replace them? This is 530 Grove. So since our walk, it actually had a large stem failure. So unfortunately, this one is very much a tree that we would want to approve for removal. On the back side of the tree, you can see bark inclusions. And right here, this is right on the opposite side of that deep injury. So this is a really weak point at this juncture. It's probably even worth going out and posting a 15-day hazard notice on it. But it was, we're close enough to the hearing. But again, that tree has failed since our last walk. This tree is at 380 Ivy. It's a ficus tree in a very narrow sidewalk with very, very poor structure. It's had a number of large stem failures, largely due to a lack of clearance over the road. But these stems that remain are not sustainable. It's also caused a significant amount of sidewalk damage, both from the foreground all the way to the edge of the building. Now, due to the narrowness of the sidewalk, this is not a site that we would replant. So this one would be removal without replacement. 426 Ivy would also be removal without replacement. The main trunk of the tree actually was in an upright position and got damaged many, many, many years ago. So the stem that now exists above this old injury was a lateral branch, a side branch that kind of took over. So very unusual, very poor structure, an obvious candidate for removal. In addition, it looks like there's a crack forming at the old main stem. This one has sidewalk damage as well. So again, now we can move on to what we're referring to as our phased approach of removal. The community spoke very loud and clearly about wanting to see other options, whether it's phased removals or keeping some trees. We're referring to this as experimental pruning. Really what we're talking about here is topping trees, a practice that is really a last resort to maintaining any tree short of removal. The issue with topping is that you're creating large stubs and heading cuts, which create this sort of witch's broom of new growth, which is weakly attached. So it's a way to get us another 3 years, and then we're going to have to reassess the trees in 3 years. But we can commit to keeping these 11 trees now, pruning them heavily, but then monitoring their regrowth. I would estimate that it's going to take about 6 months for them to recover some canopy. So the first 6 months, they're going to look a little bare. And then they'll sprout out, and we will look at how those branches are forming again. But it's really, these trees still have serious structural issues. We're just trying to come up with some way of retaining something, acknowledging that the removal of all these trees clearly has a big impact on Hayes Valley. So the first one is 508 Octavia. In some ways, I wouldn't say I'm going out of my way, but there's definitely some structural issues with this tree. We're going to need to make some very aggressive pruning cuts directly over the road. It lacks the required 14 feet of clearance over the road, so a really large stem is going to need to be removed towards the intersection. Likewise, the overall canopy will need to be pruned and reduced. There's been repeated sidewalk damage here, but this one really anchors the block, and it faces Patricia's Green and Hayes Valley. It just felt like this is one we should try to do whatever we can to prune it and cut it in a way that will reduce failure potential. But again, 6 months, 8 months later, fill out and start to add a canopy back to the site again. This is due to lack of clearance over the road. So again, a couple of these large stems will need to be removed completely, and then the rest of the tree pruned and thinned and reduced overall in size. Tree number 2 is more upright, is not as large, and does have structural issues that we're concerned about. But because it's a little bit more upright and smaller, we believe that we can prune this tree and keep it safe for the next 3 years. Tree number 4 is in front of the cafe. Again, there's some very poor structure here, but we might need to remove a large stem and or just do enough pruning to reduce some of that weight and failure potential. I heard clearly from folks every time I was out on site that this is an important tree to the community. I mean, they're all important, but this one in particular, folks really asked us about. The next tree that we would do the aggressive pruning on is 550 to 560 Octavia, tree number 2. So this is the second, technically the third tree from Ivy. It does have a codominant stem with a narrow angle of attachment, but some of the secondary branching isn't as worse as the others. So if we're pruning this tree, we can reduce failure potential and monitor again in 3 years. Tree number 4 is a tree we're willing to try this pruning on. Again, not great structure. Certainly had structural issues, but when we were pressed to see if there were any trees of the 39 that had less worse structure, we felt like this was one of them. One issue with this one is the way it tapers in, and then all the large stems originate above that point. So again, it's even the trees that we're saying we can work with, the reason for the aggressive pruning is we need to reduce weight to reduce failure potential. The last one also anchors the block, but it's also not replantable. We need to not plant trees within 25 feet of a stop sign after a tree is removed. So we'd never remove a tree simply because of a utility conflict in and of itself. But this is a tree that's not replantable. So again, we looked at it very closely. Very poor structure, codominant stems, included bark. But we felt that if we removed a couple of these stems, particularly the one that's out above the stop sign, and reduce the overall height of the tree, we could reduce some of that failure potential. The tree number 3 at 600 Octavia, this tree is a little bit smaller. There's a stem, a big, large lateral stem on the right that would need to be removed in order to retain this tree. There's a cavity with decay present, so there's a weak union and decay. Here's a close-up of that. So right where the electrical, the holiday lights cord is, that's a really weak area within this tree that's prone to fail due to the narrow angle of attachment, and it's connected to the trunk where there's decay present. So we'd remove this large stem, but then balance and prune the overall remaining section of the tree. And there's enough canopy on the upright section that it won't look completely awkward. I think 6 months later, it'll start to fill out and look more like a tree again. Again, still some issues with it, but we're looking for whatever we could find to work with. 630 Octavia, it has more of a short, squat structure to it. Again, unusual, 4 codominant stems, all about the same size, all originating from the same point. It's kind of an odd structure, but again, looking at 39 trees, which of these could we retain if we prune it aggressively and monitor? I believe this is one. Also on 412 Hayes, we have 3 large ficus in a row. These are in a bust zone, and unfortunately when there's a bust zone, we're not allowed to plant replacement trees. We need a sidewalk that's at least 15 feet wide so that the basin is at least 5 feet pulled back from the curb. So I'd literally put the trees both in the middle of the sidewalk and probably too close to the front doors. These are trees that we can't replant based on our director's order that regulates the planting of trees. So when we were looking at the trees along Hayes, even though I already outlined all the trees we still proposed for removal, these 3 in a row, because they're not replantable, we really took a closer look at. The other trees on Hayes are a little more interspersed, but these 3 collectively together really provide a great visual benefit to the immediate community. And so we took a much closer look at these trees. There are still issues with them, for sure. Higher up in this canopy are a number of codominant stems. There's also a significant amount of contact from trucks over the road, so that is a concern. Another issue within the canopy. So again, not free of some risk, but through aggressive pruning, we can reduce that risk. And tree number 2 and tree number 3, similar issues. We just felt with them not being replantable, these were the trees on Hayes that we felt would be the give back to the community. Again, really reducing the overall height rather drastically through this experimental pruning. We're calling it experimental pruning because when you prune trees in this manner, most trees don't die. They sort of produce this flush, this stress response of new growth because trees need leaves to photosynthesize. But sometimes trees don't always come back with that flush of new growth because trees store energy in their branch tips. They store energy along the main stems and also within the trunk and the root system. So when a tree is topped, it has energy to produce more leaves and then start creating photosynthesis and essentially carrying on that food production cycle again. But if you top a tree when it's very old, like these are established, you can really have problems, again, with potential the trees not coming back, and or as these new branches reform, you have to prune them and make sure that they don't fail. But again, this is something we can do for 3 years and just revisit them at 3 years from now. So in conclusion, I want to thank everyone for their patience. I did want to demonstrate that we did look at these trees individually. We took many, many photos of each individual tree. We're not looking to remove trees if we don't have to, but we are also just working with what we found. So we've been in conversation with Hayes Valley Neighborhood Association. Some folks here are part of that dialogue. Some are just here from the community for the first time. We're working with Friends of the Urban Forest and the community to plant 40 empty basins. We're in discussion regarding the replacement species. We're committing to a 3-month turnaround time from removal of tree to replacement tree. The code requires, if we issue a permit to a private property owner or we've granted a permission to remove a tree ourselves, the code allows 6-month turnaround time, but we heard loud and clear from the community that they didn't want that to lag on and turn into 9 months or a year. So the commitment is to remove and replace within 3 months. The reason that we need 3 months is that there's actually a lot of work. So after the tree is removed, we need to remove the stump. Some sites will have sidewalk repair. We need to repair the sidewalk that's been damaged by tree roots. And a lot of sites may also require shifting. Some sites are not replantable. Some sites are replantable if they are shifted just a square or two away from utilities. And then we need to cut the new basins and certainly purchase the trees and plant the trees. So that's the reason about the 3 months. Removals is one step in that, but there's a lot of other secondary pieces that occur as part of that. Again, I want to thank everyone for being patient. We really wanted to make sure we leave plenty of time for the public to provide their feedback. I will be taking notes about everyone who comes up to speak. And again, obviously as the hearing officer, we'll be walking the site in the next few days to look at these in person together. Thank you. That concludes the staff presentation.
Thank you. All right, looks like the room swelled up a little bit. So I have a bit of a concern about timing. I propose 2 minutes per person, since we are more than 30, it looks like. And so 30 minutes times 2, that's, an hour. Yes, ma'am. Okay, then we'll do our best. Yes, we'll keep it 3 minutes. Very well. Let's start with public comments. For or against?
I'd like to present a
Oh,
petition.
sorry, sir, 1 second. May I have your first and last name?
Simon Willison of Grove Street. I'd like to present a public petition. This has been in Café La Vie on Octavia, and it collected 235 signatures, and we have a copy that we'll hand over. The petition says, concerned neighbours would like to petition that any trees not immediately threatening public safety be strategically pruned or removed if absolutely necessary as part of a phased removal plan. Importantly, any work on the trees, be that removal or pruning, be done outside of nesting season for birds and outside of maternity or hibernation season for bats. And that's got 235 signatures.
Yes. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Susan Ciutat. I've lived at 531 Grove Street for 17 years. Just want to give a little background. I had a bunch of photos of trees, but I think everybody's getting tired of looking at that, so I'm not going to go through them. A point of clarification was that the neighborhood was not originally reached out to regarding this process. It was our protesting that led to the discussions. It would have been nice if there had been that kind of outreach in the beginning from DPW, but the initiative came from us. I want to be clear about that. The other thing is, they keep saying that the trees are really dangerous. And I've lived there for 17 years, and I have not seen anyone hurt or any property damaged by a ficus tree in the 17 years that I have lived there. So although we have repeatedly requested some data about this supposed high degree of danger posed by these ficus trees, we have never been given any. So it's a little hard to just accept that all of a sudden these trees that have been fine for almost 2 decades are posing a terrible danger to the neighborhood. It also feels like, so they had 39 trees originally scheduled to be removed, and after we protested, they pretty quickly came up with 25% of them that didn't actually have to be removed. So that kind of tells me that maybe they were applying the criteria too strictly. The other thing I wanted to talk specifically about was the incident at 530 Grove, which is right across from my house, which was described as a tree failure. It wasn't a tree failure, it was a truck hitting the tree. There were not 14 feet of clearance. It was a 14-foot tall truck. If that tree had been properly pruned, there would have been no incident. But the incident that did occur, there was no property damage, there was no injury. It knocked the tree loose from the trunk, knocked a limb loose from the trunk. The truck stayed there. He called 311. DPW was great. They were out there in like 10 minutes and had the whole thing cleaned up in like 15. Nobody was hurt. The tree's still standing. And I really don't think it looks like it's posing any kind of danger. So I think we need this whole process to slow down dramatically and not destroy our urban canopy, the value of which will be spoken about by a lot of other people who are here to talk on this issue. But it really, really needs to slow down. Not go ahead and save 11 and cut the other 75% and then maybe wait 3 more years to cut the other 11. It's just too drastic. It's too fast and it's too drastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next one, please.
Hello, I'm Natalie Down of 553 Grove Street. I'd like to request serious consideration to the ecologically sensitive timing or pruning of or removal of trees. Ideally, a work would be approved under conditional use permit. I would like to request that removals or pruning take place after bird nesting season and bat maternity season, but before bat hibernation. For the CEQA environmental inspection requirements to be reinstated for the ficus trees that match the city's removal criteria, regardless of the likelihood of nests. To inspect the individual trees at the exact time of removal, and then if bird nests or bats are found, to post signs and to wait until the young have fledged. Birds are the species of primary concern. We have evidence of raptors in San Francisco which are protected, and I myself have seen a Cooper's hawk on the corner of Grove and Octavia. Certain species of birds, such as hawks, crows, and ravens, and others, often reuse nests each year. Over 120 bird species live here year-round, and as the largest estuary on the west coast and part of the ecologically significant Pacific Flyway route, 350 species live, migrate, or pass through the Bay Area each year. It's also worth noting that these birds are protected by the Migratory Species Act. We also have tree nesting bats in San Francisco, including foliage nesting bats for like hoary bats or western red bats. Any trees with cavities, for example, in between codominant stems, open up the possibilities for further species to be impacted. Bats are also known to return back to and give birth in the same trees or cavities each year. In California, the western red bat is listed as vulnerable and a candidate for endangered under the California Endangered Species Act, and is proposed as a mammal of special concern. Proposing the removal of nearly all of the city's 7,000-ish ficus trees and dividing this into piecemeal chunks needs to be reconsidered as the citywide major project that it actually is, and go through the proper CEQA environmental review. If you must prune or remove trees, to issue a conditional use permit for this work to be completed after bird nesting season and bat maternity season ends in September, but before bat hibernation season begins in late November. And if work is set to start on these trees during the ecologically sensitive breeding time, I may exercise my right to appeal. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a copy.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cerise. Next one, please.
My name is Jahan Sadeghi. I live at 428 Grove. None of these trees in front of my house, but I walk my dog and I walk the area. I believe that trees are very important for the environment. They clean the air. And as the lady before this lady was saying, these trees have been here for 20, 30 years, and none of them had any problem for the danger to the community or anything else. And suddenly, the city decided to remove these trees. It doesn't make any sense to us. I think we have to protest this. We have to keep the trees on. There are some other ways of taking care of them if the branches are too long. Right in front of Daisy last year, they pruned the trees, and they are back to growing again, and things are fine. Why they don't use some other ways of treating the trees? I believe that all these pictures that the gentleman was showing, there are some pieces here and there. It reminds me like an analogy that the patient goes to a doctor, and the doctor says that, okay, you have this piece of thing here, and you may have a little bit of fever, and you may not survive. Why don't we kill you? That's what is happening with the trees. Why don't we kill the trees? That's my point.
Thank you. Very eloquent. Next one, please.
Good evening. My name is Robin Levitt. I live at 225 Lilly Street. I've been in the neighborhood since 1991. I think we all know the benefit of trees, so I'm not going to go into that. But I want to make the point that Hayes Valley, because of all the traffic that we have coming through that neighborhood, is the air quality in that neighborhood is rated as among the worst in the city. So trees are very important to Hayes Valley. And I want to also second the previous comments. You know, I've lived in the neighborhood since 1991. I know of only 2 tree quote-unquote failures in that time. And I don't understand the danger suddenly posed by these trees. They've been there for decades. And all of a sudden we have to do something about them. I appreciate the staff's careful analysis and the effort to save a lot of these trees. But again, I just don't think they pose the hazard that we're led to believe they do. I mean, I ride a bicycle through San Francisco all the time. I walk. I'm not scared of trees falling on me. I'm scared of cars running over me. And if we're really worried about public safety, we should be focusing on the misbehavior of drivers, not on a few trees that may fall and possibly injure somebody. I think the chance of getting hit by lightning are much greater than getting hit by a falling limb from these trees. So I think there has to be careful consideration. They're very important. They're very important to the health of the neighborhood. They're very important to the visual quality of the neighborhood. And I would like to see the city doing everything they can to save these trees, keep them. And if trees have to be removed, then I would propose that for every tree that is removed, that 2 trees be planted in the neighborhood to replace it. As pointed out, I live on Lily Street where the sidewalks are very narrow, and when we lose trees on Lily Street, the city is saying they can't be replaced. I've seen trees planted in the streets. You know, the streets were widened for automobiles back in the day. Let's put the trees in the streets then if they can't be planted in the sidewalks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next one, please.
I have the overhead, please. Can that be the full length of the page? The full length of the page. Good evening. My name is John Naltke, the co-chair of the San Francisco Tree Campaign. I'm here tonight to discuss the ficus removals on Hayes Valley. As you see, this notice here is issued 1/11/2019 to 2/10/2019 for 28 tree removals. On 3/28/2019 to 4/27/2019, 10 trees were posted for removal. Public Works Order 200996 and the agenda misleading the information, 38 ficus trees and 1 poplar tree for removal. It's your agenda. Within 2 weeks of the posting, a special hearing date for today was decided. Date is up here, Hayes Valley. The Octavia Plan of 2007 gives Hayes Valley priority for street planning. In red right here is Octavia. Is Hayes Valley, Hayes Street, right here. And this is the priority street for tree planting for the whole district. Again, the Octavia Plan 2017 identifies Hayes Valley, Hayes Street itself, right here, as a commercial and a local historical district. Historical district, that even gives them higher, okay? And it's right here, down here, okay, the square right there. The trees outside the businesses give shade, benches, and tables to the customers. As you see here, this is one of the basins of the trees, and we have a customer that has his drink right there. It's a bench also, and it's also a table. And you will be removing these if you remove the trees because these are on multiple of the trees outside these businesses. Requesting that DPW and other relevant city agencies to consider street scoping the area affected with the tree removals to bring forward the successful implementation of the community improvements. And here are the list of the relevant agencies. Looking for a detailed project before the tree removals are approved. So I'm looking for a streetscaping project before anything is done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for also being so far mindful of the time. You guys are great. Next one, please.
Hi, my name's Greg Hayes, and I lived in Hayes Valley, and I go there relatively often to Cafe La Vie.
Sorry, could you? Yeah, thank you.
I've lived in Hayes Valley, and I go there relatively often to Cafe La Vie. And I spoke with my friend Jackie, who grew up there. She's lived there for 58 years, and she actually, knows or knew the person because he's passed away, who planted the trees and everything. And then she sits on one of these benches on the stretch from Hayes to Ivy on Octavia, and a lot of people assemble there, and it is very much like a central meeting place of Hayes Valley. People who have, Jackie Thomas is who I'm referring to. I sent an interview with her thoughts to Ms. Waiters here, and it's very clearly labeled. I'm expecting it to be, transcribed and introduced as her comments. And and then, so generally speaking, it's a historical resource and people assemble there. And when he talked about, Mr. Buck, excuse me, talked about why these trees were going to be, heavily printed. In some respects, he was talking about trucks being able to move through there, and that's an absolutely inappropriate reason to remove, a tree canopy, specifically in that you want the trucks to move slowly. It's like, so I'm not sure if you need to reserve an appeal, but I'm definitely going to appeal if trees are, if that's the basis that they're cutting the trees and it's not a clear danger, that's more identifiable than the tree is ugly and hasn't, developed in an appropriate pruning way. That doesn't necessarily, in some respects, a lot of respects, what they're saying is true, and there are some good examples of trees that are having problems, and ficus is, generally dangerous, but you've heard the rest of the comments. Thanks.
Thank you. Next one, please.
Good evening. My name is Rye Murphy, R-Y-E. I live in Hayes Valley. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
I'm a municipal attorney. I represent various municipalities around the Bay Area. I don't specifically do CEQA work. I run into it now and then, but I do think that there's a major CEQA issue here. Other people have brought it up, but I want to just kind of run through it real quickly within my 2 minutes. So a public agency has to conduct an EIR for a project that will have a direct physical impact on the environment. I don't really think there's any question that this will. This is removal of 39 trees in a small area. I think that the city thinks it doesn't have to do it because this is pursuant to a proposition, Proposition E, which was passed, I think, in 2016, which allows for the, among other things, major maintenance constituting, among other things, replacement of dead or damaged trees. So that was passed, and then the Department of Public Works enacted this order 183151 that allowed for cutting down ficus trees. This project is pursuant to that order. An EIR was not conducted for the ficus cut down order. Again, I think that's probably because the city thinks that it doesn't have to in light of Proposition E. There are other CEQA exemptions which don't apply. There was a case out of Santa Cruz that specifically required an EIR when a city tried to repeal or kind of relax its tree conservation policies. The case is Save Our Trees versus City of Santa Cruz. The case site is 241 Cal Ave 4th 694. I think that if, the city should have conducted an EIR for the ficus tree cut down order. And I think if it's going to proceed on this, because it didn't get approval at the prior stage with an EIR, that it needs to conduct one if it wants to proceed removing these trees from Hayes Valley. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Next commenter, please.
Hi, my name is Josh Klipp. I'm going to second that gentleman's CEQA issue, and I have a letter on that I'll submit to Cerise. If you just grab that. I've worked with a few of the members of the Hayes Valley Neighborhood Association, with the community at large, really. And this is more than just the ficus removal in one neighborhood. This is ficus removals happening across the city. And so to that extent, I just want to note that this is kind of creating an additional issue with the ongoing problem of our woefully inadequate tree canopy here in a city that just declared a climate emergency and yet has no dedicated funding to plant and water trees. So in 2014, San Francisco rolled out an urban forest plan. This plan acknowledged that at 13.7%, we have the worst urban canopy of any major city in the United States. This plan proposed to add 50,000 trees over the next 20 years, or average 2,500 trees a year. In 2015, we failed that goal by about 1,500 trees. In 2016, we failed it by about 2,200 trees. In 2017, we failed that by about 2,400 trees. And in 2018, our urban canopy grew by a total of one single tree. At this rate, we're going to meet our urban canopy goals in approximately 140 years. Climate change is happening pretty quickly, and we don't have the benefit of time here, let alone 140 years. And when I press my city officials on this, the answer I usually get is these things take time, but we don't have that time. According to Public Works website, ficus trees are an estimated 6% of our total canopy. They're not perfect, but they are a part of our critical municipal infrastructure in our fight against climate change. With regard to a few specific numbers, according to the order, it looks like 7 trees cannot be replaced, so that already puts us again behind on our 2019 goals under the Urban Forest Plan. I would be curious to know how are we going to not only make up for that loss, but actually meet our city's stated goals, which would amount to approximately at least 1.5 trees planted for every 1 removed. And additionally, more specifically, how we're going to make up for the loss of the canopy percentage. Ficus are a densely canopied tree, so it's not just about losing a number, it's about losing a percentage. And then finally, just putting it out to the audience here, since this is a citywide issue, if anyone wanted to join me in talking more about this and looking at it as a citywide issue, please talk to me after the hearing, and I'd especially like to hear from the CEQA attorney that just talked. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm afraid the attorney has just left, but anybody else, they're welcome to talk about it after the meeting, hearing. Next, please.
Hi, my name's Jennifer Laska. I'm on the board of the Hayes Valley Neighborhood Association. And part of why I want to come and stand up here is so that the audience can see who I am. I have been working with the Bureau of Urban Forestry and Friends of the Urban Forest. We made the request to reevaluate the trees. We appreciate that 11 were identified that could be saved, at least for this cycle. We had certainly hoped for more. But a couple of updates. We do have a planting scheduled with Friends of the Urban Forest for June 11th to fill the existing empty wells, and HVNA board is working with them to identify the species. You heard earlier that they have the commitment to replace the trees that have to be removed within 90 days. And again, we're working to identify the species, and I will be working closely to make sure that that 90-day turnaround commitment is adhered to. And And I think the final note is, if any of you are interested in getting involved a little bit further, we'll work with the community to ensure supplemental watering is provided so that we can make sure that these trees actually survive when they go in. Our community meetings are the first Thursday of every month. Visit the website, talk to me afterward. I'd like to recruit the community to continue to grow our urban canopy. As it stated, there is not currently enough funding for all of this. There is for a lot of it. So anything happening in the future, we're going to work to do some fundraising and make sure that the watering is taken care of too.
Thank you. Next, please.
Hi, my name is Samuel K. Ackerman. I live at 570 Hayes, apartment 4. I've lived in Hayes Valley for 20 years. When I first drove through Hayes Valley on the bus, if you could turn the overhead on, by the way, I'd appreciate it. When I first drove through Hayes Valley on the bus, going to look at my first apartment there, it was the trees that drew me to it. I've had guests from other countries that photographed countless photos of these trees. I think it is part of their kind of odd structure that makes them so gorgeous and makes them so special. These were 2 trees, old growth trees that stood at 580 Hayes. They were the subject of a lot of discussion about 5 years ago when the property owners wanted to tear them down for development. The city, I believe, rightly denied that request twice. And on the second appeal, this gentleman tempered the city's opposition to cutting them down, and the permit was granted. They are right beside the very large tree, also at now at 568 Hayes. I feel like, as the representative of the city said, that these trees are evaluated individually and not with respect to the group of trees, and I think that's actually a fundamental problem in the process. There should be some restrictions on the total percentage of trees that can be cut down in any given period of time, and I'm talking much longer than a cycle. These trees have been there, since the 50s, I believe, 60s. It's like 60 years. Replacement, if you take out 2 giant trees beside what are already anchoring the corner of the street and, show some restraint by saving one that, by the way, in that tree hearing in 2014 was cited as an example of healthy growth relative to these 2, and now just a few years later, suddenly it has problems, seems inconsistent and a lack of institutional memory around the health of that particular tree. I think that couple other public safety concerns with this tree is gone, not this one, but the one that's right beside it here, which is the one at 568 Hayes. This tree is gone. The sun setting in the afternoon or late afternoon or evening would be much more blinding. It's the tree at the end of the street that I believe blocks a lot of that sunsetting sun when you're traveling down the street. There's a lot of commotion, a lot of people crossing, not in crosswalks. I think having the sun in your eyes more would be much more of a public safety concern. The city, I believe, is externalizing the cost of maintenance of these trees, both in lack of energy efficiency for residents and merchandise damage for the stores that have merchandise that get faded much more rapidly in the sun. These are all south-facing windows on Hayes. Finally, they said very little wildlife lives in ficus tree canopy. My cats beg to differ. They'll be most disappointed by the loss of these trees. And finally, in terms of public safety, if a tree falls on you, has the city ever considered that maybe it's just your day to go? Thank you very much.
Thank you. May I have the next commenter, please?
Hi, thank you. My name is Richard Johnson. I live at 415 Buchanan. And what I'd have to say is I guess I'm speaking to the department, you're looking at safety. Safety can be measured in many ways. Here, I think you're just looking at the safety of branches falling. In my case, I live near Oak and Fell and Page and Haight, which are very heavy traffic in Octavia. So my safety of air quality I'd have to beg to you to kind of deference in that type of aspect of where we're looking at that. And then also in the beauty and also the things that trees bring to our city, because when I moved into the neighborhood, there were very few trees. So with trees come birds, come wildlife, come the calming effect. And that's where I have to say, it's like when you're doing the trimming, to be mindful as you can, maybe go the extra mile to assure that we can maintain that canopy, because that canopy not only brings beauty, it also absorbs the sounds that go with the neighborhood. So when you're opening up all these different things, you're opening up safety, quality of life, and that's where I would hope that you would kind of move as your point of where you're looking at a balance of safety and quality of life, because trees, as we all know, and especially now with the urgency of climate warming, the beauty that they do of absorbing the particulates. And as someone who's lived in the neighborhood for 30 years, I see the uptick in particulates and dirty of the windows, how much soot and things like that. And the trees really absorb those type of things. And I'd have to say with them too, if like, it's great that you're doing 1 for 1, but in our neighborhood, I think we actually need a higher ratio of like, I would say 2 to 3. I walked over here tonight, which I do walk on a regular basis. There were many tree wells on Oak Street that have been chopped down, they haven't been replaced. So you need to look at it as not just a singular issue of like in these few trees, you look at it as a regional effect. The other thing I'd have to say is like when you're trimming these trees, it's great to take trees out, but when you take trees out in a canopy like that, you're weakening the structure of the trees. And I want to make sure that DPW is looking at that type of aspect, because of someone who's witnessed where you take out certain trees, the winds around here are very strong, so they could do damage in that way. So as I say, I would say to the department, you may look at your safety of your department, but please look at the greater all community safety of our air quality, our life quality, and things like that when you're choosing what to remove and what not to remove. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. May I have the next commenter, please?
Hi, Dan
Hello.
Spaeth.
Hi.
I live in Hayes Valley for 35 years. And I guess one of the things I just want to talk about is the canopy cover. During the Paradise Fire last fall, one of the very few places that you could actually have relatively clean air was underneath the ficus trees. So, boy, to lose that would just, I mean, it'd be devastating. Again, the traffic in our neighborhood, it's the worst in the city, or pretty close to the worst. The pollution is really bad. The ficus trees actually help absorb all that. Trees. I mean, everybody's looking for trees. I mean, it's an amazing thing, and you want to take them out, and it's kind of sad. Anyway, thank you for your consideration. And then I want to tell anybody that's come in, there is a sign-up sheet. Please sign in. If you haven't done so already, the sign-up sheet's over on the table.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
May I have the next commenter, please?
Hi, good evening. My name is Victor Yanuszewski. I live at 420 Oak Street. First off, I wanted to thank Chris for his time. He really, explained the situation to us quite in depth. So I really did appreciate that. I'm obviously not going to be able to speak in depth as some of the attorneys did, but regarding the safety issue, we do live in one of the most seismically active places in the world. We are surrounded by tall buildings. They're building buildings taller every day. And, it's part of the risk of life. At any time we could be hit by an earthquake. So, here we are worried about branches falling on top of our heads, but yet I would surmise that more people in California have been injured or killed by earthquakes, yet we choose California because it's such a beautiful place. I think the trees are a testament to that. So I think we just need to balance the safety issues of the trees. Typically, they've been poorly maintained, pruned. They're very overweight, I believe. So in high winds, they tend to break. Regarding the strike spike trucks, possibly looking at limitations of truck sizes. I know that some communities have that. Potentially maybe some rumble strips next to the curb that if a truck pulls too close to the curb, they could get a signal or warning. That might solve some of the damage that we're seeing to some of these beautiful trees. Regarding the PG&E damage, it seems to me that PG&E needs to pull a permit and have an arborist and have a licensed company trim these trees, and yet Chris pointed out numerous times that PG&E basically hacked and butchered these. So I would hope that the department might push PG&E to do a better job when it becomes necessary for them to do trimming at the power lines. And just basically, we just don't want Hayes Valley to look like, and I'm sorry to say, the Richmond and the Sunset, where you look down streets and you don't see a tree. So we really like our trees. I have a big, beautiful ficus in front of my house. I actually paid to have it trimmed. It was that important to me. So I just hope that you guys will reconsider the air quality, the real risk and hazard that they pose, which I think is fairly minimal based on the other risks of traffic and earthquake. So thank you.
Thank you very much. May I have the next commenter, please?
Hi, my name is Michael Nolte. I'm the Executive Director of Alliance for a Better District 6, and I'm also have lived in Hayes Valley many years ago for 8 years. And, you know, a couple things that I've heard at this hearing already, which is how much money is there for replacement trees? This has been an ongoing problem with all the trees that have been scheduled for removal here in San Francisco. We passed a proposition, but we didn't pass money to replace the trees. And so that leaves a community or somebody to having to worry about how the replacement trees are going to somehow occur. Also, you know, what really is being talked about here is citizen planning. A lot of times you allow the neighborhood associations become the voice of the community because that's who the elected officials and the community representative, the city representatives will go to. They don't necessarily go to the property owners, the business owners, and everybody else when doing stuff. And so it takes usually some outreach and outrage for getting this many people to come to a hearing, which I'm kind of amazed that this, because I've attended these tree hearings before, and this is one of the larger ones that I've been to, so I'm actually kudos for people showing up. Normally what happens here at these hearings, people line up on this side of the room, which they're not really doing, they're just going every which way, but then you know how many more people are going to speak. And, you know, the thing is not to duplicate what other people have said, but at the same time, the thing is, you know, there seems to be some policies that are being thrown at the community that most people can't really get their head around because, you know, okay, we have a bus stop and now we're going to say, well, the trees have to be removed because there's a bus stop. Well, you know, unfortunately, we've been able to live with those trees that are at the bus stop for many years, and now they're going to be removed because now there's a plan to remove trees in the neighborhood. You know, and then we're not going to replace the trees at that location because, you know, we're not, that's our policy now. And so how many other policies you're going to have that basically we're hearing about for the first time? I do agree with, well, you know, don't have the trucks with certain height knock down the branches, but, you know, everybody kind of plays a role in this. And but ultimately, the community needs to not suffer the consequence of no trees. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the suggestion about queue lines. I'll take that in consideration. Next one, please.
Hi, my name is Dan Flanagan. I'm the Executive Director of Friends of the Urban Forest. and I live on Nido Avenue, just a little bit west of Hayes Valley. First of all, I think it's incredibly exciting to have this many people coming out talking about trees. My whole life is devoted to trying to plant and care for as many trees as possible, and I'm not the only one doing that. We have 24 people at Friends of Urban Forest dedicated to the preservation, the care, and the planting of trees. Just for information also, that number has been kicked around that there would be 41 trees planted on June 11th as part of the replacements theory. Right now, we're exploring to plant a total of 90 trees in that neighborhood. So that's something that we're working on currently. Second thing is that I think everyone here has identified something really important, that with Prop E, which we were very involved in passing, did create funding source for, in perpetuity for the care of trees, but no money for the planting of trees. I've spent the last many months working with both the mayor's office and all the supervisors to try to address that problem. I right now am in conversation with the mayor to try to come up with some money for the next 2 years to make sure that any trees that are replaced will be funded to be funded to any trees that are taken down can be replaced. So please contact your supervisors and the mayor right now. The budget is being written right now, and we need about $4 million for the next 2 years to accomplish this. The reason why is I think people have not identified the fact that we did a survey of all the trees in San Francisco before we got Prop E approved. In that survey, we identified 6,500 trees that were dead or dangerous. Now everyone's saying, why is the city doing this now? Well, it's because now the city's responsible for those trees. And we've had incidents of, severe injury with tree failure, and recently in a park in San Francisco. Now the city is on notice that they have dangerous trees. That's the only reason why they're addressing this issue right now. And ficus trees are only 2,000 of the 6,500 trees that have been identified that need to be removed. And so I think that my experience for the last 10 or 11 years working with the Bureau of Urban Forestry, they're the last people in the world that want to take down a tree. They want to save every tree possible. So I can't get into the debate about ficus save or remove, but I am in the debate of we need to get a dedicated funding source for planting trees. We know that the city now is managing their forests for the first time. We're dealing with historic bad management for 30, 40 years. Many trees are approaching the end of their life, and we need the money to replace that. I can't reinforce more what Josh Klipp is saying. We need to plant more trees. We need to have a better environment to capture the, and also particulate matter. We're actually going worse in particulate matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Next commenter, please. There we go.
Hi, my name's Jim Warshow, and I've been in Hayes Valley for about 15 years. In that 15 years, I've organized several tree plantings. I volunteered with Friends of Urban Forest to help the trees that need restaking, that need some pruning, all kinds of things. When 580 had those two ficus, I was one of a very few number of people actually that showed up that day to try to save those trees and talk to their merits with many of the same arguments we've heard today about tree canopy, carbon sequestration, just, all of the issues that the caring people that spoke today have brought up. When all of this was posted, I was even reading the overstory where I was engrossed with how trees have souls, and my tree hugger instincts were amped up even more. So when I heard about the tree walks, I was probably one of the most hostile people about why does anything have to go, what's up, this is not something we can do. But the more I've been living with it and thinking about, the life cycle of a lot of trees that Dan was talking about, cities are tough places for trees, and a tree like a ficus maybe only has a 50-year life cycle in an environment like this. And the neglect that these trees have suffered through PG&E or neglect or whatever are taking their toll on them. So I hate to ever say anything that would encourage losing canopy. And the carbon sequestration issue is really real. But for a new policy that was put in effect with the ballot initiative about the city taking over the maintenance and having done the survey, there is a responsibility to really not only plant our deficit adequately, and we need to get the funding for that, but also to address the trees that need to be addressed. And I think that in the course of all the discussions, we've had with Friends of Urban Forest and the Bureau, I've been more and more confident that these are caring people who are trying to find the right path forward. And experimenting with this radical pruning to save at least 11 of them is a step. And I think that what we're doing now is trying to find the right way forward. So all the suggestions that we've heard about getting PG&E not to do their disastrous pruning, to get the funding cycle up, these are really important things to do. So I am surprised to be saying it, but I really have bought into the argument that we need to take action. Thank you.
Thank you. May I have the next commenter, please?
Hi, my name is Vladimir Vlad. I've been a resident in Hayes Valley since 1995. Grew up on Oak Street. Since then, I think we've lost at least 3 trees in my memory, 3 ficus trees, mature ficus trees, to trucks speeding down Oak Street. Limb damage occurs, only to be replaced by small trees that get vandalized. I've seen people snap them. So really, I think it's a complex issue. It's not cut and dry, no pun intended. But we do have to do a better job of looking at it holistically. And if, in fact, some of these trees are beyond their lifespan and beyond saving that, we need to plant trees with mature canopies that will grow to mature canopies, and not what we have on Oak Street right now, on the 300 block of Oak Street, which is really not doing anyone a service. So that's my comment in regards to that. Thank you. Yeah.
Next commenter, please.
Hello, my name is Christine Ensley. I'm actually one of, I would say, the newer residents of Hayes Valley. I've only been there for around 2 years. I live on Linden, just off of Octavia, right off of the Green. And I think a lot of the commenters here are reacting to the quick nature in which this tree removal would occur and the vast impact that it would have on the canopy in our neighborhood. And I think a suggestion that we take a more tiered approach to the removal and replacement of the trees could be a happy medium between all of the parties involved. I understand that these are fairly old growth trees. Perhaps, yes, they're at the end of their intended or expected lifespan. But if we could, just as if the initial plan was to remove 38 trees and then it became removal of 25 and aggressive pruning of 11, perhaps we could take a more tiered approach, look at that remaining 25 a little bit more closely and say, hey, we could put more of these on an aggressive pruning plan and replace maybe 5 a year, replace them with trees that could have more mature canopies such that our neighborhood in the short term and in the long term wouldn't see such a drastic impact with regards to the canopy.
Thank you. Yeah, you have the next commenter, please. Number 20th. And after that, I'll have a BUF representative. I will have some questions for him based on the comments that I received. Nobody want to be number 20th? Very well. In that case, I'll have a BUF Yes.
Chris Buck with Bureau of Urban Forestry. We
looks like we have our 20th commenter.
Yes, from audio that was emailed to us earlier in the day. Jackie was at tree number 3 every time I was out there. So for sure we wanted to honor that. Now her audio is 6 minutes. We will play 3 minutes and then you'll just have to battle me with the bell to make me shut it off. But let me just see if we can.
A little bit of context. Jackie is.
So Jackie, it's Jackie Thomas, and let me cue up her comment.
If your hair is too long, would you cut your head off? We need these trees.
What about, you knew the guy who planted them, right?
Oh, yes. I knew the guy 30 years ago who planted these trees.
What's his name?
His name was Ed.
He was working with...
He lived at the Ivy Hotel, and he also worked with...
Friends of the Urban Forest, right? It's working. It's just like...
Oh, okay. He also worked with Andy at the Great Pacific Tour. Ed planted these trees on Octavia between Hayes and Ivy. They don't need to go. The city needs to do something. They should have done it before. But to assassinate these trees is a crime.
Have they been pruned extensively before?
They've been pruned a few times, but not.
They should have kept up with them.
They should have.
Yeah.
And I feel that it's a tragedy to cut these trees, and also it's going to cost the city more money and expense opposed to if they would have taken care of them, which can still be done, opposed to cutting them down and blocking businesses with all this BS.
What's your full name? Jackie what?
Yeah, my name is Jacqueline K. Thomas.
What's the address? Okay. How long have you lived in Hayes Valley?
I've been in Hayes Valley for 58 years.
How old are you?
And that's more, I've been here longer than these doggone me trees and anybody that's trying to oppose it.
How long would you say you've been sitting under this tree every day for?
I would say I've been hanging out here, going to work or what have you, for the duration of my life.
And then, so for the whole life of this tree, like 30 years?
Oh, I'm older than this damn tree.
It's like from 1980?
Earlier.
70s?
Okay. My oldest daughter was born in 81. And these trees were here.
Oh, they predate.
I'm getting upset.
That's okay. That's, I mean, that's what the parents for.
Well, you just heard it here.
Yeah, definitely.
That was a testimony from Jackie Thomas.
I believe I understand that she's against the removal of the trees. All right, I'll accept that as my 20th comment. May I have a Bureau of Urban Forestry? I would like to thank everybody for the patience. That's been taking a little bit longer than usual, but these are important issues for all concerned. So thank you for that. The commenters have raised plenty of issues here, and I'm highlighting a few, and perhaps we can shine some light on them. Perhaps one of the quickest ones would be a question about PG&E and their practices or their responsibility, kind of the mechanism on how, when, under what permit they come and prune the trees. Do they employ arborists? Are they certified? All that kind of stuff.
Sure, can we answer that one first? Sure. Okay, so Chris Buck with San Francisco Public Works Bureau of Urban Forestry. There are two examples. One on Octavia on the west side, there are high voltage and low voltage wires. So the PUC requires that minimum distances be achieved from foliage, trees, and vegetation. So they have an annual inspection program. I once worked for that program myself years ago. They are forced to make pruning cuts that typically no one would want to make, but there is the high voltage lines above. So some of the pruning cuts were within those auspices, required by the PUC to do that. For sure, along Octavia. Some type of pole repair replacement, that I'm less forgiving on. That looked like if something's going to be impacted that seriously, something meaning a tree, they need to approach us in advance. So I know we've had a few sites like that across the city. We've been engaging them. I will follow up with our urban forestry inspector who covers that area to find out the history of that particular site. I didn't want to go into too much detail on it, but you're right. I brought it up, but then I sort of left it. So I appreciate the feedback.
Of course, thank you. Another maybe quick one was, and this is actually also my experience, when I've seen trees that are newly replaced, seedlings or whatever they're called. I'm not an arborist, but I see them often vandalized. And also, what's the response from DPW in this kind of cases? Do we try to protect them better, or do we replant them right away?
Sure. Vandalism is a challenge. So there's a lot of neighborhoods where we put larger stakes and protective screens around those trees. Clearly, there's more neighborhoods, it seems like lately, where that vandalism occurring. So replacement trees in Hayes Valley would make sure we have very robust staking along with protective screens. So we require it on certain streets, pretty obvious, but I do believe that is a problem. I mean, it takes a lot of resources to plant a tree and to water it. So having a young tree vandalized it's heartbreaking and a huge setback. So it's something we're well aware of, and we can certainly make sure that trees in Hayes Valley, we're doing this citywide, are planted with adequate staking and screening when necessary to make sure they're not vandalized.
And the recourse of a citizen who witnessed the vandalism, or not witness as in course, but wake up one day and then the tree's gone. What should he do?
Correct. So unfortunately, prevention it's going to be hard. It's probably like people breaking windows, in cars. Like, how often does someone actually face justice? It's super frustrating. It's pretty rare when people see it and can apprehend the person and go.
Oh yeah, no, I didn't mean that way. I mean more of is the tree damaged or missing? What can the citizen do? Can they call BUF or
absolutely
311?
Yep. So they can call 311.
Okay.
Thank you.
311. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Little more, perhaps in depth. We have a couple commenters speaking about the legality of the plan itself, CEQA, and why EIRs, environmental impact reviews, are not done for these kind of things? Perhaps you can expand on that a little bit.
Sure. What I will recommend would be that, so we have regulatory affairs. We don't typically engage in CEQA, so I need to refer that question to them specifically. I'm not an expert in that, understandably. But I would recommend that that's a follow-up item that can be pursued prior to a decision being issued so that that answer is included within any recommendation that's made by the department.
Thank you. That sounds good. It doesn't come up often, but, you know, it's a good point to expand. Let's see. Funding issues. Yeah, I had a question about funding issues that was raised by the 10th commenter, but other people have kind of filled me in on those kind of mechanisms. I understand there's some funding challenges for the care or replanting, or it seems like the maintenance, there's some money for it, but maybe not the replanting.
Correct.
Is it a dynamic issue that's being resolved as we go, or?
Correct. So the public is totally, accurate about citywide. It's a well-documented issue right now for Public Works. We don't have enough funding to replace every tree that's been removed. So we can assure Hayes Valley neighbors that this is a main thoroughfare in a corridor. If we can't get to replanting trees this year, it's not going to be in Hayes Valley. It's unfortunately going to have to be in a quieter, less busy, less commercial district. But that is something that we've seen over the last couple of years, is that we are excited and eager to embrace the maintenance responsibility for San Francisco's urban forest. And yet we knew we were going to have to remove some trees inevitably based on the citywide census that we now have. That said, we don't have funding for planting. So there are sites that some have been empty because the property owner didn't plant. And we've sent letters to them, but they just haven't planted. And others, like on Oak and Fell, we've removed and haven't replanted. So it's something we're well aware of. As you said, there was a lot of it discussed today by a lot of other people. The good news is it's not just an internal issue with me and 2 staff. It's citywide, and really most of the tree advocates are aware of it, and we're hoping for a solution. But in the short term, and it can be a confusing answer, we have funding for a certain amount of street tree planting. We will make sure that any area impacted by ficus removal is prioritized. So we will have funding for watering. There is still this sort of call for the community to, if one of these replacement trees is near their property, to get volunteers to water, because we still don't, we can use all the help we can get. We don't have a permanent solution, but we hope to get there soon.
Okay, I think the major concern is justly that the trees are removed and then nothing takes place, and years pass by, and so that's a kind of situation. But you said that you are prioritize this area. Is that correct?
Correct, and it's killing our staff because we see it, and it's frustrating because it's really, in some ways, slowing down what should be kind of the implementation of Street Tree SF as an exciting thing. But for example, we've been at Board of Appeals and other cases like on 24th Street where we have committed to spending the funding that we do have for planting in those busy corridors. We don't want them to sit vacant.
Right. Okay. Regarding the very second actual comment I received was question regarding the dangerous status of these trees and how, if these trees were so dangerous that were under removal, then how come, we are lined 11 to go, and why not 13 or 9, So is there kind of a standard?
Sure. Thank you for that question. That was one thing I didn't elaborate on. But so the question of why now, what we're seeing citywide, why, the answer is both age and resulting size of the trees. So a lot of the ficus, generally speaking, in San Francisco, are about 40 years old, some up to 50 years old. So we are starting to see citywide a lot of large stem and branch failures. So people may not be aware of that, but citywide it's occurring on all these major thoroughfares where we have ficus. Now, on Octavia and Hayes, I apologize, 530 Hayes, 530 Grove, if that was hit by a truck, I apologize. The remaining section of that tree is completely unsafe. But it's really the size and age of the trees. We're seeing a lot of failures. And so they may not all be occurring right on Hayes Street and Octavia, but they're occurring throughout the city. And there are clearly failures going on in that area too. So Oak and Fell, Haight, Divisadero, Hyde, Lombard, Potrero Avenue. We've just seen a lot of ficus failures. Fillmore. So they're happening, but it's largely the age and size of the tree.
And all of these instances, or most of these instances of failure, have been documented. I'm guessing. Do you have reports or?
Yeah, I mean, we have service request reports, so we can run reports on how many have failed. We don't always tie it back to the specific species, but we do have some data, which again I will bring. I'll forward to you this week, so that could be part of overall findings.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any additional comment from any agency? Sorry. Including both? No? Any additional comment from the public? Please. 1 minute, please.
Yes, of course. I just would like to quickly add that
I'm sorry, may I have your first and last name, please?
I apologize. Natalie Down of 553 Grove Street. I'd like to additionally add that I feel that the whole process of this removals hearing, and also of some of the funding options, for example, putting the instigation on the community to fund the watering of the trees, is inequitable across the whole of the city. The ficus trees, in fact, all of the tree removals that are happening all over the city, because are having issues, other neighbors are having issues across the city, and only the richer neighborhoods can afford the time and the money to set aside the thought to appeal, to come to these hearings. And I'd like to thank everybody who attended today. I think I counted at one point 40 people, so I think that's wonderful. But I'd also like to add that we have a special hearing just for Hayes Valley, which is great, but also other neighborhoods that are poorer in the city do not have that chance, and they do not have the ability to water the trees themselves or spend time protesting. And I believe that good trees and good air is a human right. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, ma'am. May I have your first and last name?
Susan Sutat. Just quickly, two things. One, now that someone from Buff is going to provide you with the data that we've been asking for months, I would also like to emphasize that there also needs to be data about how many of these tree failures caused injury and what level of injury. I just asked a DPW worker, and he said he knows that there have been 2 deaths in 18 years. That sounds to me pretty minimal. The second thing is, in terms of replacement, when you cut down a 30-year huge tree and you plant a tree this big, you're not really replacing it. You're putting in another tree, but it's not replacing what was lost. So even if we replaced 5 trees for every 1 ficus tree that's cut down, we're still going to have significantly less canopy and foliage. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Josh Klipp, just very briefly, since I heard for the first time that there seems to be a priority on the more trafficked or larger thoroughfare streets, or maybe in the areas that have more of an urban heat island or pollution, since I do live in Potrero Hill and I'm on near Potrero Avenue, there's just rows of basins where ficus were taken out that have sat empty for probably, I'm going to guess, 2 years ago now. So would love to hear more, not here at this hearing perhaps, but from Urban Forestry on really what is the plan for those. Thanks.
Thank you. Oh, everybody is, yeah.
Very quickly, Samuel Ackerman, 570 Hayes, number 4. I just wanted to mention also that the tree strikes seemed very high to me. Possibly that occurred a long time ago when the tree was less high, and it just looks like it's being hit now. I also wanted to mention that if capital punishment was recently put on moratorium, this seems like state-sponsored killing of life when it's not the tree's fault. It's you could call it tree species profiling. We do not want, overhead. I'll just submit this. Hayes Valley, also known as death row for trees. We would like to not let that be the
I
case.
saw in your hand earlier. I was wondering if you were gonna give it to me.
Yeah, yes, there you go. Thanks again for consideration. I would just urge, if they must go, really just reverse the numbers, save 20 some, take out 5, something like that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is John Nolte, co-chair of San Francisco Tree Campaign. I have an online petition specifically for ficus, and we have over 3,100 signatures dealing with the ficus since the start of DPW going after the ficus trees. It started with the main library, then it moved on to Jefferson Park, and then it moved on to last week we heard the 11 on Mission Street, and then today we're hearing the ones by Hayes Valley. Secondly, to deal with the planting, we need the box size, and so the box size should be 24 or 18 inch. The bigger the box, the bigger the tree, the stronger the tree would last in the planting, and that's what I would recommend for the replacement trees that FERC is going to be putting in, and plus with the wrapping around with the fence and the poles.
Thank you. That was 24 by 11? Is that what you said?
24, no, it's the box size on the bottom, the root section. 24 or 18 is the highest you can get right now.
Got it.
And also, we want something with shade because that's what we're replacing is shaded trees. So we don't want open trees, which they're recommending. We want something with shade because we want the shade back.
Okay. Thank you. Hello. Hi.
My name is Joe Nangle of 475 Fulton. My four-legged emotional support animal and I here walk under these trees twice a day, every day, for our daily walk. And I'd just like to express my concern that that if they are replaced, they're replaced with large, mature trees that do not change the character of the neighborhood. That is very important to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan Spave again. Policy is dictating that we can't replant the trees. Policies can be changed.
Okay.
Thank you. Not one man making a policy, but the neighborhood making a policy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Diane Apperson. I'm against the removal of the trees. If I had to plant a tree, it wouldn't be the ficus tree I would plant, but they're here, and there's so many of them in the city. And they're taking them out that I wonder if people consider the impact of noise pollution. When you take out a large tree, the apartments nearby hear a lot more of the traffic. That happened near me, and you really notice it. So we have to work on an individual basis of each tree. Just don't say ficus in general, they have limb failures. Each tree has to be assessed individually. And that's, in the case of Hayes Valley, I think that's just too many trees to take out at one time. So, yeah, I'm against it.
Well, thank you. All right. I think I've had a lot of input, and thank you truly for all this passion and care about trees. If there are any no more comment from public agency in response of the last round of comments, okay, I will go ahead and close this hearing. Thank you so much for participating.
Thank you.